Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
Top story, of course, being the NBA Finals, possibly concluding tonight. But, Kevin, I'm going to give you dealer's choice because I want to talk Wizards with you, too. You want to start with the Wizards or start with the Finals?
Let's start with something that's much more fun to talk about, which is the NBA Finals.
Okay. I don't know. I have fun talking about the potential for hope for once.
Let me just tell you, I'm not sure either one really moves the needle in our town right now, but I'm more into the NBA Finals, even though the Wizards are a way up on my priority list personally.
You want to talk about canceling an OTA practice? What are we doing?
Why did they? I mean, Ron was so adamant the other day. Hey, just want to remind everybody, we are definitely practicing next week. Yeah, I think they found out that a lot of people weren't going to show up with them. And that's the easiest way to kind of say, hey, we gave them the day off.
Yeah, I don't. It's a 0 out of 10 for me. Do not care.
Yeah.
Like, okay, cool. All right, so let's talk NBA Finals. When there was a lot of stuff that we talked about when I was on your show before this series, and one of the big ones was how Miami would keep up offensively with Denver, but whether it was by slowing Denver down or the ability to score themselves. When I've watched this series, I feel like Miami's inability to consistently score has been the biggest factor of why they're down 3-1. What do you think the biggest factor is?
Well, certainly in the 3 games that they've lost, I mean, they have shot very poorly from behind the arc. In the one game that they won, they were 17-35. They're 32 of 99 in the games that they lost. So their role players, guys that can stroke it, Strus, Vincent, et cetera, have come up really small in the last couple of games. The funny thing is, I think that the game they won, Game 2, I felt like the change of inserting Kevin Love into the starting lineup and putting Jimmy Butler and Jamal Murray was actually the most significant thing in winning that game. And that's hard to say when a team shoots 17 of 35 from behind the arc. But what's been interesting to me, Craig, is Jimmy Butler basically was exclusively guarding Murray for pretty much the significant majority of Game 2, and that has not been the case in games 3 and 4. And it's not like Murray got off in Game 4. He had 15 points at 12 assists, but his Game 3 was unbelievable, as was Jokic's Game 3. But, yeah, to answer your question, if the Heat had shot better the last 2 games, they would have been more competitive games. But I also give Denver credit. I think they've played 2 of the better defensive games they've played all postseason long in their last 2 games.
No doubt about it. To me, it underscores also the one thing. I don't want to say I'm questioning Eric Spoelstra because he's one of the 15 greatest coaches of all time, and I host a radio show. But it does question of okay, where could he tweak things? Where does he potentially make changes tonight? If I'm Spo, I'm playing Love more minutes, and I'm playing Duncan Robinson more minutes because those are 2 of my more reliable offensive players, and I know Denver's just going to score anyway. Obviously, Tyler Hero is available tonight as well, upgraded to questionable, expected to play. Do you think that gives Miami a better shot if they go that route, or is that just asking to lose 130 to 115 instead of the scores they've been losing by?
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's ironic. I mean, they gave up 108 in Game 2, but I felt like by far and away was their best defensive effort of the series. I mean, they totally disrupted Jamal Murray in that game with Jimmy Butler guarding him, and they forced Jokic to score a lot of points, but he wasn't the let's see if we can get this right. I am really
the facilitator.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
I am a little bit tired right now and a little bit in the weeds right now with my podcast, but I'll get back to that.
Okay.
Could not talk there for a second, but I don't know, Craig. I think that I think overall Miami's got to be physical and they've got to defend if they're going to have any chance. Or even if they make shots with Duncan Robinson out there, it's going to be difficult for them to hold them to a number that gives them a chance to win.
Yeah, I just think it's tough because you're just not beating Denver scoring in the 90s. And unfortunately, like you said, it's been guys like Strus and Vincent and Caleb Martin, who was incredible in the Eastern Conference Finals, who who haven't been able to score at all, and that's part of Miami's problem. Kevin Sheehan's with us here on the Hoffman Show. Of course, you can listen to the Kevin Sheehan Show 10 to 1 every day on the Team 980 and the Kevin Sheehan Show podcast as well. I think the other, we talk about Murray and Jokic, but like one of the things that kind of coming out of this series, assuming that Denver does win it, is how good is Jamal Murray? We all know Jokic is MVP caliber, but is Murray being just sensationally elevated by Jokic? Obviously, they're a tremendous fit together. Or is this guy one of the best 5 point guards in the NBA at this point, and the only reason that we don't think of him that way is because he had an injury that derailed him for 2 years when he was clearly on that trajectory with the 50-point performances in the bubble, and we see him again doing what he's doing in the finals.
I think that's part of it. I think if we had seen him for those two postseasons, I'm not sure Denver wouldn't own another title or have been at least in the finals. He's a great scorer. He's a great player, but Jokic makes it easier for everybody. And his screening is kind of underrated. The dribble handoff is a big part of what creates a lot of space for Murray. I've loved Murray's decision-making, Craig, the last couple of games. He's been an absolute fantastic passer and has made all of the right decisions. And, when he really got it going in various games in this postseason, they're such an unselfish team that they look for him, and and that's when he'll get into volume shooting, but it's because the rest of the team is all for it. I think he's a great scorer. I think he's a really good decision maker, and I think the injuries probably are what kind of prevent us from calling him that. But I think a lot of people after watching this postseason are ready to go there anyway.
As they should be. I think he's got 10, 10, 10, or 3 10s and then 12 assists in the 4 games, if I'm remembering correctly, which is definitely not his MO, but you see what he can do as a scorer and how he leverages that. Is there any other player to you in this series that has really stood out, has shown you something that you didn't know they had, or has stood out in a way that you didn't expect?
You mentioned him already. I think Duncan Robinson's really proven to me that he's much more than just a shooter.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed watching him. Look, great shooters when defenses are trying to run them off the 3-point line. Some guys can't, show the ball, head fake, and put it on the floor and make a play. And he's done that consistently, really over the last 2 series. That's been impressive to me. And clearly, some of his minutes wouldn't be there if Tyler Hero were playing. I like Duncan Robinson. I think he's more of an overall offensive threat than just as a shooter. And then I think Aaron Gordon on the other side has been phenomenal. I thought he was great, obviously, on Friday night, but I think his defense has been great. The one matchup that Jimmy Butler won't go at offensively is Gordon. You'll see whenever Gordon's on Butler, he tries to get, a ball screen and get a switch to get somebody else on him. I think Gordon's been really good. Those would be the two that I guess I've always liked Gordon, but I've always considered Duncan just a one-trick pony, and I think he's developed beyond that.
I think that's such a good point. Gordon is the guy I thought you would say, but I'm glad you brought up Robinson because he was a one-trick pony. That wasn't like some figment of your imagination or anybody else's that's described him that way. This was a guy that would like catch the ball and then pretend that he was allergic to it and get it out of his hands as soon as possible, either getting a shot off with a ridiculously quick release or just give the ball back and run back the other way around the same screens he just came from.
Right.
And now this is a guy that's evolved his game. And like, if I'm Wes Unseld Jr., I'm locking Corey Kispert, who has already shown some flashes of doing the similar stuff, but like I'm locking Corey Kispert in the film room with Duncan Robinson tape and being like, that can be you. And I think the evolution of his game is really impressive. And frankly, could either save his time in Miami or get him another role on a bigger role on another team if they decide to move him this offseason.
Yeah. Not to mention the fact that when he wasn't playing, he was never a problem. That's part of their culture, I guess. Everybody accepts their role. Look, these playoffs, you and I talked about it before. It's been an incredible level of basketball, and for me, incredibly dramatic from the start to where we are. I mean, Friday night was a letdown. I would have liked to have seen Miami figure out a way to at least make that game more competitive, and I hope we get a really tight, close game tonight, because we've only had one close game in this series. And that game, by the way, was put away late, and Denver made kind of that late run to get back into it. But I'd love to see a great basketball game and a thrilling basketball game, because these NBA finals have been, maybe what some projected, which was, two teams that not everybody was looking forward to seeing. Denver's been great to watch, but I'd love to see another couple of games if we can get them.
Same as well. Basketball's been such a high level. It's like there hasn't been any massive blowouts, but there also hasn't had the late game drama that you'd hope out of an NBA Finals either. It's kind of been in this weird 8 to 15 point spread seemingly from the second quarter on in every game. Kevin Sheehan's with us, of course, Team 980 and the Kevin Sheehan Show podcast, as if you don't recognize the voice. So what I did want to ask you about Denver and kind of the way they're built, and specifically the patience that they've had. It's something that, of course, gets referenced last week with the Wizards, and I'm sure in every NBA market that's not playing right now, people look at what Denver did and admire them for not pulling the plug on whether it's the players or even someone like Michael Malone, a very, very high-level coach who everyone knew was a high-level coach. Sacramento pulled the plug on him and thought it was incredibly stupid at the time, and Denver hired him straight away. And they've stuck with him even though they haven't gotten to their ultimate goal. Why is it that you think they've been able to do that, and why more teams aren't willing to have the kind of patience that they've had?
Well, for starters, you've got a player who's elite. You've got an elite superstar, and if you have one of those, you have a chance to win a title. You got to go back to 2004 and the Pistons to find an NBA champion without an obvious or at least debatable top 5 player in the league. The other thing too, Craig, is they've been winning. They've won 50-plus games a couple of times, and when they weren't winning 50-plus, they were winning in the high 40s. That's easier to stick with. I listened to Ted talk about Denver too, but they're not comparable to the Wizards. They have a truly elite superstar, and by the way, another guy who's really, really good. And both of those guys are a lot better than the number one player and the highest paid player on the Wizards team. And the Wizards can't have that much patience when they're losing 45, 47, 49 games a year. The Nuggets have been in the playoffs for 5 straight years. They were, without Murray, those were legitimate reasons why they didn't go much further. But they've had great regular seasons, and they have a superstar on their team. They've got a top 5 player on their team.
So I think, obviously the Wizards contrast is we do that because we're here, but I contrast it with a team like Philly, right? Because Philly also has that player. It's Joel Embiid, the guy that finally beat Jokic for the MVP this year. But Embiid, who has also won 50 games a bunch. Actually, I'm looking at it now. I think Philly, let's see, Denver's won 50 games this year, and they won a 2018, 2019. Obviously, you got some funky seasons with COVID and everything in the middle. But
right,
Denver,
exactly.
or Philly's won 50 this year, 50 last year. They won 50 back-to-back years in 17, 18, 18, 19. Joel Embiid will now be on his 3rd coach in that stretch, and Michael Malone's been there the whole time. And I admire, and I wonder how much of it has to do with the media market and, Jokic's personality versus any other superstar that maybe is a little less patient. But I just think it's fascinating that they said, no, we're on the right track. It's hard to win. We have to keep tinkering, but let's not mess up the stuff that's working. When so many teams like a Philadelphia 76ers will be no, we got to change the coach. We got to change some of the key players as opposed to trying to stick with a plan.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm trying to think. Before Doc, was it Brett Brown?
It was Brett Brown.
No.
But if you want to look
Brett
at,
Brown. Okay.
I guess Milwaukee moves on from Budenholzer this year, right? Same kind of thing.
Yeah, to me, Monty Williams being moved on by Phoenix,
sure,
I don't get that at all, because I considered him to be a very good coach. I'm not a big Doc Rivers fan from an X's and O's standpoint, never have been. So I kind of understand that move, but I don't, It's a good question. They're winning lots of games, and yet they keep swapping out the coaches. I mean, I don't know. There's a big difference for me watching Denver and watching Philadelphia. Philadelphia to me plays a style of basketball that I think makes a lot of old school basketball fans cringe, whereas Denver, it's really, really pleasant to watch them play, to watch a team so unselfish, to watch 5 players involved in a lot of possessions, whereas, you watch Philadelphia and you watch James Harden, essentially dribble the air out of the basketball and create. Look, he's a great shot maker. And some of that sometimes is entertaining to watch, but I thought that 76ers Celtics series was one of the worst series of the postseason. But I don't know what the answer is to your question. I mean, look, it's our next football owner.
Yep.
And I think he made the right decision on the coaching swap, because I think Nick Nurse was outstanding and consistently got more out of less in Toronto. And I think sometimes that's kind of a really good measure for how good of a coach is, how good a coach is. But, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what they do with personnel.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the funny thing is, I agree with you on Philly this time around. Where I think Philly messed up was the Brett Brown one. I think Brown got them out of the process and was a smart guy that kind of understood the roster.
A few times, right?
Yeah. And, whether it's moving on from Brett or like letting J.J. Redick get out the door when he was still so good with Embiid and, obviously the Jimmy Tobias stuff. Like there's a lot of mistakes that got made there that are, if they had just been like, nope, we're good, like stick to it, as opposed to continuously zigging and zagging, maybe they're at a similar place to where Denver is right now, who just kind of maneuvered around the edges. All right, speaking of the local teams, real quick, what were your impressions of not just Winger and Dawkins, but some of the commentary that Leonsis made last week, including what he said to Adrian Wojnarowski on his podcast, where he's like, yep, I failed in my role in this as well. Does that give you hope, or are you in just, man, I've been a Wizards fan for so long, Bullets fan for so long, that I'm going to need to see some results before I have any palpitations of hope in my heart?
Well, first of all, I thought Dawkins and Winger were impressive. Okay, so, but what does that mean? I mean, I actually thought Albert Hainsworth was super impressive in his introductory press conference back in 2008 or whatever year that was. And by the way, he was. But I listened to that Woj pod with Ted, and and there was some, self-reflection, and there was, a self-evaluation of giving himself kind of a failing grade. There was also a little bit of throwing Tommy Shepard under the bus, too, and, talking a little bit too much. I'll tell you what, going back to the press conference, that was a Wizards press conference. I thought, with Ted, to a certain degree, we got a little bit too much about Monumental and the behemoth, media giant they've created, I guess. I mean, I don't know if that's true or not. It's not relevant. I mean, Wizards fans want to hear about the basketball team. And I don't really personally care if Monumentals become a media giant and because of it, he said we're an it kind of a franchise. Like, we've got the it factor. I mean, come on. I mean, this basketball franchise has been a disaster, but I was impressed with Will Dawkins in particular, and everything I've read about Winger, I'm super impressed with. And I have to give Ted credit because I feel like this offseason, it feels like a big swing. It feels like we've been, I was just expecting a general manager to be hired to replace Tommy Shepard, and they made 3 big hires. And by the way, JT3 was elevated, and it seems like a different approach and a big swing for Ted. I don't care how young and how edgy they are. That doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that they're competent and they know what they're doing, and everything I've read speaks to that. But the bottom line, Craig, like in all of this, is somehow they have to land a top 5 superstar. And there's good fortune in that. Milwaukee, some good fortune that Giannis was there whatever, 13 or 14, wherever he was, where, good fortune that Kawhi Leonard was where he was. And then, by the way, was available for Toronto to acquire him and win a title. I think they've drafted exceptionally well when they were in OKC together, but they have to somehow combine keen insight and outstanding evaluating talent and skill with perhaps some good fortune to end up with a contender.
So that's the thing that I really want to follow up on with Leonsis on is, like, do you when you talk about the plan and Shepherd failing to have one, like, is it about a plan to quote unquote win with big old air quotes, or is it like, this is how we get a top 5 player? Because if you don't have a plan for that, then you don't have a plan to win. And the air quotes are there forever, and you're talking about making the playoffs and like, woohoo, we made playoff gate, and congrats, tell me about the profit margins. Which, like, I also get why Ted cares about the profit margins, because it's actually his money. But for the rest of us who just want the wins, like, if you don't have a plan for that, which is going to involve some level of luck, and really not even that, Kevin, if you don't plan on relentlessly pursuing that, that's the thing that I think was missing under Shepherd and Grunfeld was, we can be a little better and maybe make the second round. It's like, no, forget that. Relentlessly pursue getting a top 5 player, and that's the commitment that Ted has failed to make in his dozen years running the team.
He talked about a transformational free agent in that Woj pod, going back to the early years of, he almost said that they set it up to draft John Wall. I don't know if I think that's a bit of revisionist history, but let's just go with that.
He also forgot about Jan Vesely's existence, which I thought was actually genuinely hilarious.
And the transformational free agent that they were trying to set themselves up for, it was KD in 2016. It was all in for Kevin Durant in 2016. And anybody that had been paying attention knew that Kevin Durant was never coming here. And, in the process, they had actually developed a pretty decent basketball team, not a championship contender, but a team that was for a period of time capable. Now, with Wall and Beal staying together, making progress as players, being healthy, and some of that got away from them. But I still believe, and I don't even think this is debatable. I think Randy Whitman, from an X's and O's standpoint, was by far and away the best coach they've had here in the last, 10 years. And those teams were legitimate Eastern Conference Finals contenders, but not championship contenders because LeBron was in the conference.
Right.
So that wasn't going to happen. I don't know the best way to go about getting the next LeBron or the next Giannis, looking at two different draft positions completely. But there's a little bit of good fortune, but obviously you take your shot at having top 3 to top 5 picks for a few years and hopefully landing on that guy along with one or two others like they did in Golden State or like they did in OKC when, it was Durant, Harden, and Westbrook.
Yeah. And,
by the way, they didn't win a title.
No, they didn't, but I will take 10 years of having a chance.
Me too.
That's the generational contender piece that Winger was talking about for sure. Kevin Sheehan, 10-1 each and every day here on the Team 980 Kevin Sheehan Show podcast each day as well. Always appreciate your time, sir, and have a great rest of your week, and good luck with whatever else you got going on the podcast that you graciously allowed us to interrupt.
A couple things to get done. Thanks for having me, as always.
You got it. See ya. Kevin Sheehan, everybody, with us here on the Team 980. So how do they acquire that next player? Perhaps through the draft. Is there one that perhaps is slipping through the cracks that could fall to them at 8 this year? We know Wembanyama at 1 is supposed to be. A lot of people think Scoot Henderson, who's going to go 2nd or 3rd, could be as well. Brandon Miller out of Alabama. What about someone who could fall to 8? Glenn Consor's been on his draft study habits. So we'll talk to Glenn about that, about the draft, about the prospects, and about what he thought about Winger and Dawkins next. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app.
Celebrate summer in D.C. with the Team 980.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.